Okay, how are we going with this? All good?
Yeah, we can see it. Cool.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, thanks a lot, Alyssa, for that presentation. I thought it was really helpful. IP is definitely something that we consider in our business. I really like the key takeaways as well. It's something that we take very seriously as a medtech startup company, and IP is definitely something that we talk a lot about, but it's not just the not just a patent or any kind of IP you get at the end, but it's kind of the strategy on how to manage that and how it combines with the commercial strategy. So I really like that takeaway at the end. So today I'd like to talk a bit about some of the pitching concepts, especially for medtech, from our own experience developing a medtech startup company, what to cover and what we've learned along the way. And we'll have some questions at the end as well. So just to start off, I just wanted everyone to join me in imagining a situation. So there's different times where we might get the opportunity to pitch our medtech concept. It could be during a hackathon where we actually have the opportunity to present for an award, some kind of financial or even non-financial award, or even pitching can come up if you even meet your dream investor. Or even if some of the concepts from here turn out from just an idea after the hackathon and even into a company, well, what about hiring and meeting a potential employee? How would you pitch your concept to that potential employee? Or even not in person, but even some grant opportunities, they come up as well. And these are all different ideas where we as medtech innovators would actually need to present our medtech concepts, and they all have some aspect of pitching relating to it. So today I'll just be sharing a couple of concepts about what to consider for some of these areas. I can go into about me later, but just wanted to provide a bit of an analogy as well. I mean, this is something that I learned from one of my commercial business professors when I did the biodesign innovation course. When he used to say that good music is both a combination of structure and performance. I mean, we've got structure, which is of course, what is actually written down, what is the sheet music, and how this is intended from the creator to actually be presented to an audience. But without a good performance, which is on the other side, well, that structure it's really not heard by the audience, and having that performance is just as important as well. So combined with the performance and with the structure of the sheet music, that's very important. And it's really no different to how things are with a good presentation. I mean, a good presentation, it's really about structure and performance. It's really exactly the same. And when we talk about structure in terms of pitching a medtech concept, it's, well, what is the content? And I'll talk a bit about this later. And the structure can also be in the form of a slide deck, which is, of course, what you'd be presenting in terms of a final pitch, or even to an investor, or even on a pitch competition. And this could also be something like an executive summary as well, even sending some material to an investor or even a stakeholder by email. But similar to pitching a medtech concept, I mean, we've got performance as well. Timing is obviously a big factor, especially within pitch competitions, where a lot of the pitch competitions we have, they are having a time limit associated with that as well. So, and I can talk about this later as well, but with that performance comes voice and also engagement as well. Some presenters are very natural at presenting their concepts to an audience. Some are very charismatic. Others, such as myself, we're a bit we're not as expressive or charismatic as some of the others in the room, but this doesn't mean that we can't get the concept across. It's really about a combination of all of the above, which really makes a good presentation. So with that in mind, I'll just head back a bit about myself. So I'm also a biomedical engineer as well, like Alyssa, but I also did a commerce degree as well in economics and finance. But really my relevant experience to share with you today is that I am a co-founder and a chief operating officer at a medtech startup company. We're called Navi Medical Technologies. So the key problem that we're trying to solve is that for premature babies that require drugs and nutrients to grow up to be nice and healthy, they require drugs and nutrients to be delivered through the umbilical vessel, but it's difficult for the delivery mechanism, which is a thin flexible tube, to be placed in the correct position without using an X-ray. So our technology is to help the clinicians to safely deliver drugs and nutrients to the patients by providing a real-time tracking system for the tube, so that they don't have to rely so much on X-ray, and this leads to positive patient complications as well. And really, I started the company with another engineer and another clinician and a few other people doing their MBA, because we started through the biodesign innovation course at the University of Melbourne. So that's where engineers like myself, commercial people studying their MBAs, and also a clinician came together through a university course, and we came together to understand the clinical problem first, followed by prototyping, seeing what would work. We tried a few different concepts, and finally presenting the business case at the end. It's very similar to a hackathon, except over it's over a year as well. But this was actually a part of a university subject, and I do have a bit of a soft spot for hackathons as well, as you can see there from as well. And I also did a bit of research on our own experience pitching done to date by Navi, and you can see that we've been pretty busy over the past number of years. We've had approximately 50 pitch competitions. This is approximately 5% of the funding we've raised. So we've raised over 7.5 million to date, Australian so far, and 5% of that approximately has come from pitch competitions. And what pitch competitions are, it's really an opportunity to enter. We usually present some kind of business plan for an organization, and usually a certain number of entrants get selected to do a final pitch, and this could be a range of different formats, which I would go through later. But this is really presenting our concept usually to a public audience, sometimes private, but usually a public audience, and being judged by a experienced judging panel. And this is really what a pitch competition is. We've done around 50 of them, so we've been pretty busy on that aspect. With regard to discussions with investors, so this is relating to raising capital through equity. So we would give up some shares in exchange for some investment in our company. We've pitched to a lot of investors. We've pitched to around 150 investors. Not all have converted into an actual investment, but this is really what we would have to do. It's constantly presenting our concept to a different audience and trying to explain what we're doing. And approximately 35% of our investment has come from investors. Grant applications, so this is mainly through government grants, but other non-government grants as well. But this is usually non-dilutive sources of funding. We've tried to apply for around 50 different grant applications so far. 60% of our funding has come from grants, and this is really our chance to really pitch our concept in a non-verbal way on an application to try and get our message across. But it all comes down to presenting the right concepts. And of course, the other kind of general networking, friends and family, even Uber rides, we usually have to present what we're doing, or even share what we're doing to even friends and family, or even on a cab ride back from the airport. I mean, you kind of never know where this one leads to, but as innovators in our field, we always need to be presenting, refining our pitch, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. Sometimes it works with a lay audience. Sometimes we kind of tweak around what really needs to be done. So I totally encourage kind of presenting whenever we get the chance to, because sometimes you kind of get like blank looks from people when they don't really understand what you're talking about. But on other times, people really get it. And those are the times where we kind of reflect and we say, yeah, that really made a lot of sense. Let's incorporate that into one of our next pitches. there's a lot of areas to consider in medtech, and when we talk about pitching our concept, we do need to consider usually these 20 areas. I mean, and I'll definitely go through these on a later slide, but there are a lot of concepts to cover. When we talk about timing and pitching our concept, we don't have all the time in the world, and we do have to be very selective in terms of what we actually have to present, and that's really the challenge of what we need to do as innovators and of owners of our own concept. And that's something that I just like to take a quick step back on before I go into some of the details in terms of what opportunities we actually have. And it goes back to the table that I had before, but what you'd probably get exposed to for the hackathon is the pitch competition. So usually this is for a couple of minutes long. A number of teams get to go up on stage and to pitch their concept. There's a Q&A component. It's usually similar to what the presenting time is like. Most frequently, these are usually 5 minutes long, so we get to pick out of those 20 concepts before about what we actually want to present. Sometimes there's the 3 minutes, sometimes it's a 10 minutes. I've had one opportunity to have a 20-minute pitch, but this is extremely rare. I don't see this very often. Sometimes for initial rounds of pitch competitions, for some of the local ones in Melbourne at least, there's like a 30-second round or a 1-minute round where we actually have to really pitch quickly and really get most of the messages across. And we really have to be selective in terms of the areas that we consider in medtech. And for the pitch competitions, Alyssa did touch on the NDAs or the non-disclosure agreements. We have to be careful about what we present publicly as well and what we're comfortable to present. But it's definitely I'd say it's a fine balance of knowing what your team is comfortable to present with just enough information so that the audience can understand what you're talking about, but also not presenting too much. I think it's something that does come with practice, I think, and it does come back to like sharing the concept with friends and family and really friendly advisors, and you can kind of give it a shot in terms of being a bit, I guess, light with the information to begin with, and when others are kind of struggling to understand what you're talking about, then maybe start to layer a bit more information. I mean, that's what we did, and we kind of settled on a method to do that now, but it definitely does take practice as well. Sometimes pitch competitions can look like a video application. In the world of Zoom, we kind of need to get used to the video applications. Maybe some of you have done video interviews before in the past as well. It's quite similar. Have to get the message across very quickly in the first couple of minutes. And the last few concepts about the pitch competitions is that what helps is that it's kind of like a uni assignment. You usually do get a assessment criteria provided, which is quite helpful. You get to go back and trace it back to what the criteria is to that judging panel as well. Investors, of course, needs to be spoken about, where it can happen over a coffee or a drink or even over a meal. This can always happen. And usually you might not even have your laptop ready. Sometimes it's just like a free-flowing conversation. So really knowing your concept back to front has been really helpful. And that's something that we've needed to get used to over the years. Sometimes we do get the opportunity to present over a meeting room where we can actually bring in some of our physical prototypes and even our and even share like a slide deck. But sometimes we need to be ready because we might actually meet a potential investor over a networking event, and we just got to be ready. You just got to go. Or maybe we're in a networking event and someone introduces us to an investor, and we got to be ready to go. I mean, we usually don't have a slide deck ready, and this is something that we always need to be ready about. And of course, email, we get a lot of email introductions as well. So being able to really write down what our concept is in a couple of sentences, so that if we do get an email introduction and our concept gets passed through, at least it's just like a paragraph long in terms of what we're actually working on to get some interest from investors. And what we found with investors is that through our discussions, it's not like a pitch competition where we get 5 minutes to present and 5 minutes Q&A. It's usually, okay, let's book in 1 hour for a chat, and we could be opening up our slide deck, and we always get questions along the way. We usually encourage this as well, just so that we're not really presenting with a lot of questions on the backlog. We actually encourage a lot of questions in between as well. So we found that to be really helpful. Conversations with investors over a networking event, they could be a 30-second elevator pitch, or could be up to an hour or two with a detailed discussion with an investor. And just a quick note on the NDA, usually the initial meetings with investors are actually without an NDA, because investors see these kind of concepts all the time and they don't actually like being locked in so early. But as we progress into further due diligence, we usually start signing NDAs. But I think as early stage innovators, we need to be comfortable with how much we share in the initial stages, and be prepared to share what your concept is without an NDA, because I have a feeling that you'll get that quite a bit as well. And of course, grant applications, we get 60% of our funding through this. We have to be very efficient in terms of what words we use in our application. Just like a uni assignment, we get word limits enforced. We sometimes get attachments, have to be very wise about it. But I wouldn't underestimate the ability to really pitch a concept using a written format. And it's something that's taken quite some time for us, because with our concept, I mean, most concepts are can be quite complex to communicate, but that takes a lot of practice and kind of needs a bit of time to get right as well. And of course, you never know where the random Uber ride conversation is. I mean, we've had some investment interest just from like talking with our Uber drivers before. Like you really never know where it could go to. It could be anything, anywhere, could lead somewhere, and we always need to be ready to be able to present our concept, whether it's at a party or at a networking event, or even to your friends and family. You kind of never know, and knowing the concept back to front has been really helpful. So I had mentioned that I'd like to come back to this slide that we had before, but in a 30-second pitch, we actually like to cover 3 main areas, and this is really to have our audience really understanding what we're developing. And we usually focus on the 3 areas, which is firstly what clinical problem we're solving, second is what is our solution, and third is what I would personally include in every single pitch is an ask, because well, some of the best pitches I see is there's kind of a balance of how much the team knows, but there's also an element of kind of vulnerability and willingness to be coached, and also asking for something as well. It's definitely a psychological element, but I've seen enough pitches, and there's definitely I've definitely seen from the audience perspective we're much more inclined to help out a team if there's a clear ask, and there's definitely a human element in helping out different teams when they actually ask for it. So I'll definitely include an ask. And really the aim for a 30-second pitch is to give a general overview. When introducing the clinical problem, you can start with saying something like the problem that we're solving is, and launch into it, or the solution is, our solution is whatever it might be. And for an ask, it could be currently we are seeking, funding, connections, introductions, could really be anything. And these are definitely the 3 main concepts that I would include. And usually for an initial pitch as well, if there is time, some people like to include a hook as well, so to really get people interested in what they're talking about, especially when there's a lot of pitches going on. So hooks can be like, imagine if, or did you know, or how many of you here have, I'm sure some of you have seen some of these hooks before that really catch your attention in the first couple of seconds. The 1 minute pitch is pretty similar to the 30-second pitch, just with a little bit more detail on those different aspects. But if I was to include one more area within the 1 minute pitch that the 30-second didn't do, would actually be the competitive advantage. And one way of describing something like this could be, we're better than alternatives because of this reason. And this really gives the audience an opportunity to want to ask more questions, or really knows what is different about your technology than to others as well. Some people like to include the team here. It's a bit of a personal preference. I personally like to keep the team for later, because I think we usually get more questions about it anyway. That leads us to the 3 minute pitch. It really gives us the opportunity to round out a couple of different areas, such as the team, the path to market and scale, some of the development plans as well. And you could kind of tell before that the 30-second and the 1 minute pitch for me has kind of been an introduction to what we're working on. But when we get into the 3 minute pitch, we get to add on a few of the other commercial elements as well, so that we can really demonstrate that we do have a commercial understanding of what we're actually working on as well, which is very important for grant applications and investment and even pitch competitions as well. And it's really about providing enough evidence to the audience that they understand that it's not just the technology that we're working on, but also a overall commercial plan around it as well, which I'm sure is required for the hackathon. Okay, now we get into the 5 minute pitch. I mean, this is probably the most common format that I see. So these really are the core topics. You can see that we can start to layer in some of the other areas: device description, pricing and revenue model, market sizing, regulatory reimbursement, IP, the use of funds. I mean, these are really the areas that if I was to hear of a 5 minute pitch, and if these areas were covered, I would think that there's enough background information about that concept for us to fully understand what the company is working on. So it's really rounding out a lot of those different areas. And just another aspect I would give as well is that when presenting a 5 minute pitch, we do have a bit more time, and when we have an opportunity for a 5 minute pitch, actually one area that is quite helpful is that we like to actually add in a personal story as well. So it might be from the founder's perspective, it might be from an observation you've seen in a clinical setting, it might have been a story that is in the media at the moment, and really kind of bringing it back. I mean, people respond to stories and people can understand them, and that is also an aspect of the hook to really get people's attention. And if there's an option to really tie back the technology to that original personal story, or even that story in general, those are usually very strong pitches, and it really shows that the founding team has a really strong connection to what they're solving as well, which is personally what I've seen is quite helpful, and some of the other successful pitches as well. I've also included the device description as well. I mean, that's so point number 6, which is a little bit different to point 5 of the solution, where I've really found that having a good device description or even a device animation has been really helpful. We usually have a bit more time in the 5 minute pitch, and in our initial pitches, we got so many questions of people not really understanding what we're working on, because we just had like an image on the screen. And what that meant was we started to learn and we started to build in device animations, and finally people were understanding what we were working on. I mean, it was all in our heads before, but once we started putting a video in place in our slide deck, it was super helpful, and we found that really helpful, really worth the investment. The 10-minute pitch is something that also comes up as well. It really adds to those different details, but we also like to include something like an alignment of offer here, which is point 20, which is depending on where you're asking for help from, there's usually an element of why that person would help you or not. If it's a philanthropic investment, then you might be aligning with their different impact areas. If it's a venture capitalist, then you might be aligning with an area that they'd like to invest in, which might be medtech or life sciences or another area. I mean, there's always ways to link it back to the stakeholder that you're trying to get some assistance with. So I definitely find that quite helpful. And of course, finally, the 20-minute pitch, which rounds out all the different areas, of course. And the point that I didn't touch on before was point 17, which is the use of funds. I mean, the use of funds, which is really, if we were to get investment, then what would we use that for? I was mentoring a team recently for another pitch competition, and one of the specific assessment criteria was, how are they going to use the prize money? How are they going to use their funds? It was one of the core criteria points, and really clearly explaining what you would use the prize money for. I mean, if it's going to make a big impact for a really discrete project for what you're working on, then those are usually the very strong ones. But really being clear about how the team is going to use the money is what I found to be really helpful. And of course, that brings me to the last portion of the session today, which is kind of sharing what we've learned along the way. So you can probably see, like, we've done quite a bit of pitches before, and a couple of things have worked for us. Like I did mention, incorporating that personal story or the case study has been super helpful. I presented recently in the US for a pitch competition where we won the gold prize for that, with some prize money as well. And one of the judges specifically mentioned that he really liked the fact that I had a personal story up front and I did link it back to the case study at the very end. And this was, you'd be kind of surprised like how little teams do this, but of course it has to be done sincerely, but if done well, it's really a really important tool from what we've had from our experience. Likewise for device animations, we found this to be extremely helpful. We've gotten so many questions about like, how does it work? You know, like the worst thing is like when we present for 5 minutes about what we're working on, you know, we're so worried about the IP that we don't really share anything about what our technology is. So we kind of go over the details like super quickly. And then we present for 5 minutes, maybe go over the technology for maybe 20 seconds and kind of move on to the commercial aspects. And at the very end, the judge is like, sorry, can you explain your technology again? What exactly is it? And we know that's a real weakness because, you know, we presented all this commercial work, but that judge is probably thinking, well, I still don't get it. Like they're still trying to figure it out. So I've really found having the right balance of describing the technology is really important, and having an animation is usually the best way from what we've seen. With respect to sticking to the time, I mean, timing is really important. Usually for pitch competitions, we get shut off when we're over the time anyways. So knowing how much time we have for each person or each format has been really helpful as well. Understanding the audience is definitely a big one. Doing your research on who the judges are, what their background of information is, or understanding of things as well. Or even an investor, maybe they have a personal connection, or they have or they might be willing to be a supporter in your company because they do have a personal connection with you. But really understanding that in the first place, some research on the audience needs to be done. And of course, having that really clear ask, you know, how much money are you asking for? What are you going to use it for? Even if you're not asking for money, usually asking for introductions or mentors or even connections has been really helpful as well. What has not worked? Yeah, a lot of stuff hasn't worked. The first 2 points, I mean, we've had slides where we just have too much text, and in the pitch competitions, and people just can't follow, and we know that they can't follow it because they're not reading everything. But also not having enough text on the slides. I mean, it really depends on the format, but we've had a couple of slide decks that we share over email, And we usually have two different slide decks. Actually, we usually have like one pitching slide deck with kind of less text, and the other kind of investor deck, which is a bit more detail, and they kind of stand on its own. So if we were to send out a slide deck, then an investor or a different stakeholder or supporter can actually read it straight away and can actually understand exactly what we're doing. So it's a good balance. Got to have the right balance for the right format. Not having enough description on the technology. I mean, this has really hurt us in the past. I mean, it's just so important to get it right. And we like to include an analogy sometimes. I mean, the analogy that we found quite helpful for our technology is we sometimes link it back to a car's parking sensor. So we say that our device works a bit like a car's parking sensor, but for catheters instead. So clinicians can actually track the position of the catheter tip in real time. So that's something that we found is quite helpful, is really having a clear description on the technology. But also Q&A. I mean, pitching is, if it's a 5-minute pitch, we can nail the pitch and get it exactly right. But if there's 5 minutes Q&A and if we're not prepared, then really that's where everything kind of comes loose. A few other considerations. I mean, communication and delivery is, of course, very important, and practicing to get this right has been really helpful. Body language, pauses, eye contact, all that kind of thing. Multiple people during Q&A. I mean, this is something that kind of gets some like mixed feedback. I think it needs to be done well, but if one person's presenting and if a couple of people go up for Q&A, it can sometimes be a little messy if it's not done correctly. So maybe just something to keep an eye on, I think. And likewise for physical prototypes during pitches, sometimes it works really well, sometimes it doesn't. We usually don't bring physical prototypes. It's just a bit messy, but if done well, it could be really effective. Appendices, we sometimes include appendices. We usually don't have time to go through it in a pitch competition, but sometimes it's helpful to have as a backup. You never know. Slide design and branding. I would totally recommend getting a designer to help with some of the branding and colors and actually laying out the slides. I mean, I'm an engineer. I don't make the best slides, and it does take a lot of practice, and we usually get a lot of help from this outside. And of course, practice. Practice is a big part of it. I mean, when Steve Jobs used to give his presentations, he used to practice for 1 hour for every minute he would give a presentation for. So if it was a 30-minute presentation, he would practice for 30 hours. And that's just the level of practice needed. And just to wrap up, I mean, there were a couple of concepts that we did cover today, but it really does come down to that, you know, good music is structure and presentation, but a good structure and performance, but a good presentation is also structure and performance, and it really does come down to it. So in the end, just gotta have fun and practice, and it takes a while to get right, but in the end, it's definitely very rewarding, and with the right audience, it can definitely be done right and very effective as well. So I'm happy to take any questions later on, but thanks very much.